Welcome everyone. You are watching Theme Park Action here on YouTube. This video was produced with fair use. On today's show, we will be looking in at some Disneyland history. We feel that it is so important that the magic of Disneyland be passed on. Disneyland has so many layers of history. Most were started by Walt Disney himself. Once we start to peel back the layers of history, the backstory enhances why something is there at Disneyland in the first place. At Disneyland, Main Street, USA is packed full of magic, most of which we just wonder by, without sometimes even knowing why something is there. Today we will be talking about the Main Street Flower Market. Yes, it's those plastic flowers you see on Main Street, but you can't buy them, and they are not for sale. Let's look into why Main Street has these plastic flowers there. What is the backstory of the flowers, and how is this even started? Let's talk about this key Disneyland history. Enjoy the show.
When Walt started to design Main Street, USA in 1950, even then Main Street went through so many changes, even before Disneyland opened. It had to be better than perfect for Walt. Set at the turn of the century 1899 to 1901, Main Street has kept almost to its original design. Walt wanted his Main Street to be a part of small-town USA. On most main streets, there was a little bit of everything. This supported the hustle and bustle of daily life. Did you know that Main Street is set up in 4 sections? Every building on Main Street has a real address. Starting at Town Square, the first part of Main Street is called Main Street South. The second half of Main Street towards the castle is called, you guessed it, Main Street North. Right in the middle of Main Street are 2 side streets. Near the Carnation Cafe is Center Street West. The other side near Starbucks is Center Street East.
When Disneyland opened in 1955, Walt also wanted to have real-life characters associated with Main Street, USA. There was a police officer walking his beat. A lamplighter could be seen lighting the gas lamps at dusk. A newspaper boy walked up and down Main Street greeting guests and handed out Main Street newspapers printed for that day. A Main Street had vendors, and Walt also wanted to have a vendor selling their good to Disneyland guests.
Walt thought that who wouldn't like flowers, so the Main Street Flower Market was born. The location of the market was on Center Street West, near the Carnation Cafe. In the early days of the flower market, real flowers were being sold. The problem was that guests would only want to purchase fresh flowers. Walt felt bad, because the flowers didn't last very long, they kept dying. Walt watched as buckets of flowers were being thrown out daily. This upset Walt greatly. Walt called in his Imagineers and instructed them that he wanted to sell flowers that would never die. Walt said he wanted them to buy or make him flowers that would never die. The gentlemen in the room looked at each other, mumbling, "Plastic flowers?" When Walt wanted something, there was never a question. It would immediately be done. Walt was presented with plastic flowers of all shapes, color, and size. Walt cheered and said, "Perfect." The plastic flowers in the Main Street Flower Market were all set out and displayed with pride. There was only one problem. No one wanted to buy plastic flowers.
One day, Walt was told that the plastic flower sales were terrible. Walt said that the flowers will never die. It was thought that Walt would say that the flower market was a bad idea and all the plastic flowers would be removed. Walt said, "Well, in that case, then don't sell the flowers to anyone. The plastic flowers are not for sale." Again, several cast members stood there looking at each other, but when Walt spoke, it was done, never questioned. Walt also instructed as long as the park was open, he wanted a cast member to be there at the market and pretend to sell the flowers, just like a real Main Street vendor. So the cast member in charge of the flower market on that day would answer guests' questions about the flowers, pose for photos, and offer guests a real-life Main Street experience.
Again, Walt knew what he was doing, and Walt achieved what he wanted. The Main Street Flower Market offered guests a real-life experience on Main Street, USA. It was a true vibe, and the market really enhanced Main Street to be a real Main Street. Guests loved the Main Street Flower Market, and not one guest ever complained when they were told that the flowers were not for sale. Let's now fast forward to 2024, and yes, the Main Street Flower Market is still there. Walt's legacy has continued.
But the appearance of the Main Street Flower Market is a welcome addition to an area already full of ambience. It's absolutely lovely, and you'd be hard-pressed to tell that the flowers weren't real. Little features like this make Disneyland worth coming to over and over again. This one was made without fanfare, and I think it's been a nice hit. I hope we might get more of these little quiet places of beauty around other parts of Disneyland Park in the near future. In the early years of Disneyland, Main Street USA used to sell a much broader variety of goods. Along with standard souvenir fare, Disneyland sold tobacco, lingerie, and magical flowers that never wilted. How did Disney accomplish this impossible feat? All of the flowers were made of plastic. This unique space on Main Street remained open for 20 years, a remarkable feat during a time of constant turnover in the area. By the 70s, Disney wanted to use the space for dining, and the flower market hopped across the block into the smaller eastern end of Center Street. In 1955, the attraction was an efficient, maximum utilization of space. It would include the construction of a flower stand and 2 flower wagon bodies, planter boxes, and liners, with lattice work by restrooms and a storage area for the flower stand. The costs were as follows: design, $433.50, labor, $3,250.79, materials, $272.61, outside purchases, $459.92, 2 umbrella frames and covers, $32.06. Including studio overhead, construction, and Cowlco subcontract costs, the job cost totaled $5,682.67 once closed.
The Disneyland Flower Market was operated by Disneyland. Incorporated. Maps and guidebooks published during the years of operation have identified this outdoor shop simply as the Flower Market. Though the sign above one of the main carts clearly read Disneyland Flower Market, year-round, imported plastic flowers of every description are displayed.
The Disneyland Flower Market was one of the preferred Disneyland merchandise locations to work. And Salisbury, known to guests as Flower Market Annie, was a merchandise hostess who had the longest tenure with Flower Market, lasting from 1955 until about 1977, when she retired. When Annie was first employed by Disneyland, she had 3 family members who were also employed by Disneyland, and Annie's own daughter even blossomed into one of Disneyland's first tour guides. So the next time you visit Disneyland, stop off at Center Street East, get your favorite beverage, sit down and have a look at the Disneyland history right in front of you. Today, the flowers of the Main Street Flower Market are changed out on a regular basis. It depends on the season as to the types of flowers on display. While sitting there, think of Walt. Because of Walt Disney, the Main Street Flower Market is still there today. Just think of all of the history. Think about the millions of people who run right by the market. But now you know the history, and your day at Disneyland is just a little bit better. There was so much to say here about some plastic flowers. They are not just plastic flowers. Those flowers are Walt's legacy. Thank you, Walt. We had fun making this show today. Thank you for watching. This video was produced with fair use. See you tomorrow. Back to our regular programming.